I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davies because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so,
the date, Friday, December 5, 1997. That is the day that we will focus on today. It was a report in the Gleaner on page 2. It was headlined, FINSAC to pump $85 million into Billy Craig. And we're going to see what that money was for and who benefited from this capital injection into Billy Craig. In the meanwhile, let me welcome everyone to Jamaica 411. If you are surfing the net looking for that one channel which goes deep into issues where others only scratch the surface, well, you have come to the right place. Of course, we may not deal with all the issues, but we certainly select those issues that we believe is important and that would add to your knowledge base. Now, I want to thank you for subscribing, for hitting the notification bell, but most of all, I want to thank you for recommending this channel to others at home and abroad. We also want you to know that we welcome your views, so please feel free to leave your comments in the comments section. And of course, we thank you in advance. To my subscribers, welcome back. Always lovely to have you. And you know the ropes, right? You're going to go ahead, please, and give the video a thumbs up from now on. Share the video, and then you can rejoin me. I'll wait for you. And of course, I thank you all in advance. Well, now that you're back with me, let's get down to business. So, what is so important about this date? The Financial Gleaner, Friday, December 5, 1997, page 2. The headline read, FINSAC to pump $85 million into Billy Craig. But what was Billy Craig? Well, Billy Craig, the name, was Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited. It was one of the financial institutions that failed in the 1990s. The first thing the government did, of course, if my memory serves me right, was to take it over as it did the other financial institutions that were bankrupt. And they were taken over by FINSAC. Yes. And before they did, though, Bunting and Golding was attempting to negotiate with the Billy Craig Group to buy the Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank. Why? Because Billy Craig was a merchant bank. It had a Cambio license to trade in foreign exchange and 5 branches around the island. But most importantly, it was a merchant bank, and DB&G sought to acquire a merchant bank license since 1993 but failed. So you imagine that when Billy Craig became bankrupt and therefore available for sale, they would have jumped on it. But let the Gleaner tell us the story of what happened at the time. Under that heading that I mentioned, FINSAC pumped $85 million in Billy Craig. And they begin the report, the proposed merger of Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank and Bunting and Golding, which would have seen Glen Rosa, the Craig family holding company, gain 16% of Bunting and Golding, has unraveled. So that was the deal just the year before. They were supposed to have merged. And the deal was that this is the Billy Craig family now, would have received 16% of the Bunting and Golding shares. But then that deal fell through, and we shall see shortly what could have been the reason why Bunting and Golding backed out of that deal. So let me continue. A year after the deal was first announced, Bunting and Golding boss Peter Bunting revealed that his company will now take over the merchant bank, with Craig family shareholders gaining no shares in DB&G. I would venture to guess that what probably happened was that wind got over to them and fell into their ear that FINSAC was going to take over the merchant bank. So, why give up 16% of your share if you can get a better deal through FINSAC? It's either that, or maybe Mr. Bunting went to sleep one night and had a dream that FINSAC was going to take them over, and so decided not going to go through with the original deal and going to wait and see whether his dream will come to pass. Whatever it is, he did not go through with the deal. Instead, he decided he was going to take over the merchant bank and that the Craig family shareholders will gain no shares in Bunting and Golding. So he was anticipating that he will get a better deal for his company. Let us continue to read. It says, instead, FINSAC, the government agency set up to restructure the sector, will pump $85 million into Billy Craig Finance to help shore up the capital base, and Bunting and Golding will add another $30 million of its own capital to complete its consolidation of the bank. The Financial Gleaner, of course, quipped, effectively, FINSAC appears to have paid $85 million for DB&G to take it off its hands. DB&G posted a net profit of $8 million in 1996, so just the year before, right? They posted a net profit of $8 million. It says funds under management grew from $1.6 billion in 1995 to over $2 billion in 1996. For the first 6 months of 1997, after-tax profits grew by over $5 million to $10.2 million, compared with the similar period in 1996. Earnings per share improved by 2 cents to 9 cents. So we're not talking about a lot of money in terms of what they have as, money that they can spend. So they made a net profit of $8 million last year, the year before. And then the year in 1997, right? The first 6 months after tax profit was $10 million. Yet they found $30 million to pump into Billy Craig. So that money must have come from somewhere. But we'll read along and see if it does say where the source of the funding came from, whether they sold shares, borrowed, or injected money by the shareholders, injected capital into the business. But let me continue reading. Bunting and Golding raised $51 million at the start of the year through a rights issue. So now we know the source of the funding, right? It would have come from that. So having read the article in part, it's now time to take a closer look at what it is the Gleaner was telling us. This $85 million that was pumped into Billy Craig, remember now, it was Bunting and Golding who bought it. They pumped $30 million into it, and FINSAC pumped $85 million into it. What the Gleaner did not report was why. It only said that it appears as though FINSAC was paying Bunting and Golding to take Billy Craig off its hands. In other words, it was a problem. Of course, it was bankrupt because it had assets, which was about 1/3 of the liability. In other words, the liability was triple the assets. I mean, you can't get more bankrupt than that. So that is the appearance from reading this. However, we need to now look to see why FINSAC would have pumped money into Billy Craig if there is indeed a reason. And for that, we're going to turn our attention now to the Bank of Jamaica to see if it left us any important piece of information for us to continue our discussion here as to what this could possibly be and whether or not we have made a discovery. Yes, a very important discovery. Let us now see what the Bank of Jamaica said. It says the Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank was acquired by Bunting and Golding Limited and FINSAC under a joint venture agreement signed the 22nd of June 1998. In keeping with the terms of the agreement, capital totaling $231.8 million was injected by both parties after year-end to clear existing deficit and meet statutory and prudential requirements. Now you will remember that the liabilities was $200 million, right? Apparently that is what they needed to clear in order to put it back on good footing. Now, this is a very interesting piece of development, don't you think? Yes. What I read into this, my friends, is that Bunting and Golding wanted to buy Billy Craig, but they needed to pump $231 million into it, and they did not have that money, and possibly did not have the asset base in order to secure a loan to purchase Billy Craig and the merchant bank, which is the license that they wanted. So they didn't have the money. This $231 million would be far more money than they have tried to raise on the stock exchange. As a matter of fact, we read that they had already raised $51 million, right? So they would not have been able to purchase Billy Craig. Bunting and Golding clearly did not have the money. That's the meaning of this, because if they did indeed have the money, they would not have needed to have been in any joint venture with FINSAC or anybody else. They would simply take their money and buy. So what we're looking at here is a highly favorable deal by the government of Jamaica. At the time, the PNP government and the Ministry of Finance was led by Omar Davies. Remember, this was 1998 that they signed this joint venture agreement, right? That would now benefit Bunting and Golding. But as the Gleaner pointed out, since they seem not to have had the information, that it seemed as if FINSAC was paying Bunting and Golding to take Billy Craig off its hands. But while we ponder on that, let us take a look at what this business of joint venture means. So what is a joint venture? A joint venture is a business arrangement in which two or more parties agree to pool their resources for the purpose of accomplishing a specific task. This task can be a new project or any other business activity. So in this case, FINSAC and Bunting and Golding would have agreed to pool their resources in order to settle the $231 million, this is Jamaican dollars, debt that Billy Craig was in. What we're trying to find out is, why did FINSAC enter into such an arrangement, a joint venture arrangement with Bunting and Golding, when it appears that they have not entered or sought to enter or did enter into any such transaction, joint venture with any other party in the sale of any of the failed institutions. In other words, there were 30 failed institutions. Why did FINSAC choose this particular transaction with Billy Craig, and the desire of Daring Bunting and Golding to purchase Billy Craig? Why did FINSAC choose to enter into a joint venture arrangement in order to facilitate Daring Bunting and Golding owning Billy Craig? And I'm going to show you that that's exactly what it was that FINSAC did. So we are now looking at the Bank of Jamaica news release that was made the 19th of March, 1999. This would have been almost 2 years after DB&G would have entered into this joint venture arrangement with FINSAC to purchase Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited. So let us read what it says here. It says, these balances are taken from prudential returns submitted by the following licensees to the Bank of Jamaica and have been attested to by the respective managements as reflecting a true and fair representation of the affairs and condition of the licensees at the reporting date. So this now would be, I suppose, the audited accounts of the various financial institutions that's supposed to report them to the Bank of Jamaica. Now, we've already looked at the one that we're interested in, which is Billy Craig. And now we're going to look at the notes section of the report to see if there's any information there we might find useful. Now we come to what is headed licenses surrendered or revoked up to December 1998. Data no longer included in system totals. Now remember, there were 30 institutions that failed that FINSAC took over, right? So we're looking at some of them who either surrendered their licenses or their licenses were revoked and what it was that happened thereafter. Great. So we begin first of all with deposits of Fidelity Finance Merchant Bank were transferred to the Citizens Bank during March 1998 under an arrangement facilitated by FINSAC. FFMB, which is the Fidelity Finance Merchant Bank, operations are in the process of being wound down, and its license has been surrendered by the shareholders. Did it say anywhere here that the FINSAC entered into any joint venture arrangements with them or with anybody else for that matter seeking to purchase? No. Matter of fact, their operations was going to be wound down, locked down, shut up. That's it. No longer existing. That is the impression that I'm having from what I'm reading here. The process that the operations are in the process of being wound down and its license has been surrendered. So that's the end of that. Good. So we don't lose sight of what it is we are doing this research in. We are trying to determine whether or not there were any other persons seeking to purchase any of the failed institutions that the government of Jamaica, through FINSAC, entered into a joint venture arrangement in order to facilitate them like they did DB&G. So that is the reason why we're looking through all of them here now. So the second one now is deposits of Partner Merchant Bank were transferred to National Commercial Bank on the 15th of April 1998 under an arrangement facilitated by Financial Institution Services Limited. Its license was surrendered by the shareholders. So that's that. That one going closed down, finito, gone out of business. Now, in anything that I just read about Partner Merchant Bank, did it say anywhere that FINSAC had entered into a joint venture with either the shareholders or anybody else to purchase Partner Merchant Bank? No. Let's look, maybe we'll find another one. It says the license of Barclays Finance Corporation was revoked on the 22nd of June 1998. I don't know how them salt so. This particular financial institution's license was revoked. So, no possibility of a joint venture with FINSAC for sure. So, let's move on. During September 1998, deposit liabilities of Buck Securities Merchant and Caribbean Trust Merchant Bank were transferred to National Commercial Bank under an arrangement facilitated by FINSAC, and their deposit-taking licenses were surrendered the 4th of September 1998 and the 1st of September 1998, respectively. Again, did FINSAC enter into a joint venture arrangement with anyone to purchase these financial institutions? No. What it says here is that their licenses were surrendered and that the monies that they had was transferred over to National Commercial Bank. The same thing happened with Partner Merchant Bank. The deposits were transferred to the NCB, and the same thing with Fidelity. Their deposits, that such as they had in their institution, were transferred to Citizens Bank, and they were shut down. So what it is showing here is that at no time at all did FINSAC enter into a joint venture arrangement with anybody. They simply shut them down. The next heading would be Other Notable Developments up to December 1998. And it says here, on the 20th of February 1998, the Minister of Finance assumed temporary management of Caledon Finance Merchant Bank Limited, pursuant to Section 25(6) of the Financial Institutions Act, and deposits were transferred to Citizens Bank during March of 1998. So this time around, it was the Minister of Finance that assumed temporary management of Caledon Finance Merchant Bank, right? But during the period, they transferred the assets to Citizens Bank. And remember, the government was already in control of Citizens Bank. Then it goes on to say, a provisional liquidator was appointed during June 1998 and subsequently, so it was bankrupt, so they put it in bankruptcy. During September 1998, the court appointed a liquidator and a winding up order was made. So again, no joint venture arrangement between FINSAC and anyone else to purchase the Caldwell Finance Merchant Bank Limited. No, it was put in liquidation and the assets would have been sold and paid out to the creditors and depositors, I imagine. Now, next it says, on the 23rd of February 1998, the Minister of Finance assumed temporary management of Corporate Merchant Bank Limited pursuant to Section 25(6) of the Financial Institutions Act. Subsequently, on 28th of July 1998, the Minister of Finance made an order under Section 25(b)(1) of the Financial Institutions Act, vesting the shares and the subordinated debt of Corporate Merchant Bank in himself. So once again, there was no mention of any joint venture arrangement between FINSAC or the government and anyone else. But let us be patient and read on. Maybe we might find another one. So now we come to Island Life Merchant Bank. It says on the 18th of June 1998, Island Life Insurance Company Limited executed an agreement to sell its shareholdings in Island Life Merchant Bank Limited to FINSAC. This entity is being merged with Citizens Bank. So you get that. That is the decision that they made. No joint venture. Next, we're looking at the West India Company of Merchant Bankers. And it says, on the 27th of October 1998, West India Company of Merchant Bankers Limited transferred its deposit liabilities to Scotiabank, Trust and Merchant, and surrendered its deposit taking license. So this company voluntarily wound up itself, didn't have to wait on FINSAC or the Minister of Finance to do any such thing. And then they went out of business. It says now Intercontinental Merchant Bank. Deposits of Intercontinental Merchant Bank were transferred to Citizens Bank Limited during November 1998 under an arrangement facilitated by FINSAC. It says process is engaged regarding the revocation of IMB's license. So that is going to close down. There again, no mention of any joint venture. And the final one on the list is Horizon Merchant Bank. Let us see if there is any joint venture arrangement here, and so defeat our argument that this was a special arrangement to facilitate Bunting and wilñ purchasing Billy Craig, which was what they desired. So let us see now if Horizon Merchant Bank seal mash up with arguments. So let me read. Assets and liabilities were fully assumed by Citizens Bank during November 1998. Its license is to be surrendered, and that's the final item on this list. Billy Craig, it says, as the second item, right? The second item that you're looking at on this list, I skipped over it because that is the subject matter. Of the number of entities that were mentioned in 1998, Billy Craig was the only one, the only bankrupt financial institution where FINSAC entered into a joint venture in order to facilitate Bunting and wilñ being able to acquire Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank. I need you to understand what is going on here. Bunting and wilñ wanted Billy Craig Finance Merchant Bank. Of all of the merchant banks that were shutting down, this is the one that they wanted. But there was a statutory requirement that for it to continue, because it's now, remember now we know, its liabilities 3 times more than its assets, and therefore it is bankrupt. So for it to continue holding a license as a merchant bank or continuing in operation, it has to be taken out of that bankrupt state that it's in. It's insolvent. You're following? Yes. So because it's insolvent, you have to first clear up the liabilities, the debts that it owes, either to the deposit or loans that it took. But that is what it owes, and that amounted to $231.8 million. So Bunting and wilñ wanted it. They had to go find this $231.8 million to clear up that, and then they can take it over. Either that or FINSAC would take charge of all of the debt and sell it to them without the debts. That is how it often works as well. Right? But no, that didn't happen this time. And there must be a reason why. There must be a reason why FINSAC would have gone about its affairs in this very odd way. Something that it never did before. Why did it do so? Now, this was reported as a statement to shareholders by Peter Bunting, who was chairman in 1997. And we're going to see if he gives us any clue. He did mention Billy Craig. Let's hear what he had to say about it. So Peter Bunting said, the process of acquiring Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited is essentially complete. We have signed, listen to what he said now. We have signed an agreement to acquire 51% of Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited, simultaneously with FINSAC injecting sufficient capital to cover the previous deficit. So what is he saying? He says this initiative commenced in 1996 in an effort to expand the scope of business of the company, and they are referring here to Daring, Bunting, and Golding. The acquisition places Daring, Bunting, and Golding in a strategically beneficial position. You heard that. A strategically beneficial position. Don't forget those words. So you must be asking the question, so what's this Billy Craig? And why was it so attractive to buyers? Not just DB&G, would it have been attractive to other buyers as well? I said yes. So exactly what is Billy Craig? It was a merchant bank. It had a merchant bank license. It also had a cambio license. And what is more, it had 5 branches. 2 in Mobay, 1 in Kingston, 1 in Mandeville, and 1 in Savlamar. So that is what made it attractive. And it was particularly attractive to Daring, Bunting, and Golding because of the merchant bank license. Remember, it has been, or it was trying to get a merchant bank license since 1993 to no avail. It had a cambio license and those 5 branches. Of course, they would have to close down 1 or 2 because at the time in 1996, DB&G also had 4 branches. And you recall what Bunting had said to his shareholders, that the purchase of Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank would put DB&G in a strategically beneficial position. You remember that? Yes, and now you know why. Now you know why he said so. Now you have been hearing about Daring, Bunting, and Golding involved in sweetheart deals. Well, I am here to tell you that this was the sweetheart deal, because after the move to take over Billy Craig, that was when Daring, Bunting, and Golding profits went through the roof and they started to do extremely well. Yes, but the question is how? In 1996, when they were negotiating the purchase of Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank, they clearly did not have the money. And that was why they were offering 16% of their shares, and I'm sure some cash as well. When they began to negotiate with FINSAC, they were in no better position than they were before. They just did not have the cash to clear the $231.8 million. And FINSAC wasn't going to take any shares in DB&G. So how did they resolve the problem? What did they do to make it possible for DB&G to purchase Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank? And I have to put it this way, because that's exactly what they did. If DB&G did not have the funds to purchase, and FINSAC, for some reason, wanted them to have it, then they had to go into a special arrangement in order to facilitate DB&G. What did they do? They entered into a joint venture agreement. Now you ask the question, why? What did they bring to the table? Because each party had to bring something to the table. Well, FINSAC came with money. What exactly did Daring, Bunting, and Golding bring to the table? Well, at first they brought no money, but they may argue that they brought managerial skills. That joint venture arrangement was to make it possible for Daring, Bunting, and Golding to say they own Billy Craig. And I'm going to show you what it is I'm talking about. This is a report from the Jamaica Stock Exchange. And here is Peter Bunting addressing their shareholders. And it says the notes to the financial statements dated March 31, 2000. And here Bunting is giving us the background to the negotiations to purchase Billy Craig. Now, whenever you hear me speak about the company, that company they're speaking about is DB&G. All right, great. So at number 1, paragraph 3, it says, by agreement dated September 30, 1996, DB&G agreed to acquire the total operations of Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited, and it was renamed DB&G Merchant Bank since June 25, 1999. That's when they merged. And Billy Craig Investments Limited. So it was two of the Billy Craig companies that they were negotiating to buy, the Finance and Merchant Bank, as well as the Investments Limited, Billy Craig Investments Limited. And they now will be called, from now on, the investee companies, right? Subject to certain conditions. So what that meant was that for the sale to go through, certain things had to be done. Peter Bunting went on to say, by agreement dated June 22, 1998, DB&G agreed with FINSAC Limited to recapitalize the investee, that's the two companies, right, that were the purchase from Billy Craig. And accordingly, effective January 1, 1998, shares were issued by the investee companies to FINSAC for the total consideration of $106,417,000. Make a note of that, please. So did I. Now, what did they not tell us? First thing, they did not tell us whether these were ordinary shares or preferential shares. Preference shares, sorry. They also did not tell us how many shares that this money bought, right? We don't know that. We only know the dollar figure of what it was that FINSAC had actually contributed. Right? Now remember the Gleaner had said 85 million? No. In the first instance, it was $106,417,000. You also notice that not a penny was handed over by DB&G. DB&G may argue, if we are to be fair to them, that they came to the table with their knowledge of the merchant bank. So they would have come to manage this company for FINSAC and eventually bought into it. That is how it would appear, which is precisely the reason why FINSAC and the management of FINSAC chose the route of going via joint venture arrangement, because it's the only way they could have handed Billy Craig over to DB&G, who did not have the money to buy it, as everybody else and every other company who would have purchased the other failed institutions or shares in the failed institutions from FINSAC, they would have had the money to be able to do so, or they wouldn't get them. So this was clearly a special arrangement devised in order to confer a benefit to DB&G by FINSAC. That would now facilitate them purchasing Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank as well as Billy Craig Investments Limited. This could only have been done through a joint venture, because then Daring, Bunting and Golding can say they come in with the management skill to manage Billy Craig, and FINSAC will say we are coming in with the money in this venture to clear away that $231.8 million liability, which had to be cleared in order for Billy Craig to retain its merchant bank license. If they did not clear it, they would have lost the license like the other companies. And that was what this joint venture arrangement was. It was to facilitate DB&G buying Billy Craig, and government money, taxpayers' money, was used to facilitate them. That is a sweetheart deal of no mean order. In 1997, Bunting said in December that the agreement was not penned. He's saying here, in 2000, the year 2000, March 31, 2000, that in January 1, 1998, the companies, the ones that they were buying, they had issued to FINSAC shares totaling $106,417,000. That money now would have been used to recapitalize the two Billy Craig companies, right? Not a dollar, you would notice, was contributed by DB&G because they never had the money. Then Bunting went on to say, on January 1, 1999, the following year, and February 1, 1999, the month after, additional shares were issued to FINSAC and DB&G by the investee companies, the two Billy Craig companies, for the consideration of $41,600,000 and $52,342,000 respectively. What does that mean? It means that FINSAC had pumped a further $41,600,000 and DB&G for the first time contributed $52,344,000 to Billy Craig, right? And Bunting is going to say now the shares issued to DB&G represent 51% of the issued share capital of the investee companies, with the remainder being held by FINSAC. So FINSAC contributed a total of $148,017,000 for the minority share of 49% of the two Billy Craig companies. And DB&G, they only contributed $52,344,000, yet they control 51%. They had the controlling shares, they had the majority shares in those two FINSAC companies. When FINSAC entered into this deal, whose interests were they representing? My interest and yours and those babies that weren't born yet? Or were they furthering the interest of Peter Bunting, Mark Golding, Chris Derring, and their shareholders? Who was representing our interests? And when I say our, I'm talking about the taxpayers. FINSAC pumped $148,017,000 in these two FINSAC companies to facilitate Mark Golding, Peter Bunting, Chris Derring, and their shareholders taking over those two FINSAC companies. That was the equivalent of $4 million US, while DB&G contributed $1.4 million US. We up till now don't know what happened to that 49% when the Billy Craig companies were merged with Derring, Bunting, and Golding. For the answer to that question, what became of the 49% shares that FINSAC had acquired or retained in the two Billy Craig FINSAC companies? Well, let us have a look. In the notes of the financial statements at note 32, it speaks of the list of subsidiaries of Derring, Bunting, and Golding and how much of those subsidiaries they actually own. So we're going to look now at the first line item. It says Derring, Bunting, and Golding Merchant Bank Limited, and they said it's formally known as Billy Craig Finance and Merchant Bank Limited. Now, how much of it is owned by DB&G? You see that in the third column? 51%. 51% of it is owned by DB&G, right? Now let's look now at the one that is underlined, the third item. This now is a Billy Craig Investments Limited. And look over in the third column and you notice that DB&G owns it 100%. What does this mean? What it means is that this thing is even looking worse. It means that when DB&G had injected their $52 million to recapitalize the two FINSAC entities, some portion of it had actually gone to purchase Billy Craig Investment Limited by 100%. So what it means that they had put in even less than the $52 million to buy the merchant bank. I wonder if you're seeing what is going on here. When FINSAC had pumped in the $148 million, all of that money went to the merchant bank, Billy Craig Merchant Bank. Yes, not $1 had gone into the Billy Craig Investments Limited. That's why Derring, Bunting, and Golding owns 100% of it. And yet, FINSAC spent $148 million for 49% of the merchant bank. And because we know that it's only $52 million that DB&G had put into the deal, we now know that a portion of it went to the Investments Limited, which means that even less than $52 million went into the merchant bank. And yet they were given the majority shares, 51% for their less than $52 million. They received the majority shares, while FINSAC, who pumped in 3 times or 4 times more than what it was that DB&G pumped into the merchant bank, they only took for themselves 49% of the shares. Who benefited from a deal like that? And was the deal offered to any other company buying shares in the distressed companies from FINSAC? Now, when you talk about a sweetheart deal, this is it. Let me explain how corrupt this deal was. And I have to say it's corrupt. If there was profits to be made, and there were profits to be made, because after this deal, the whole thing took off. What it meant is that the man who put in less capital into the business, he is going to get 51% of the profits. And the man who put in 3 or 4 times more money into the business, he's only going to get 49%. Why did FINSAC carry out its affairs in that way? And who benefits from that? Surely it was the taxpayers who were shortchanged in this arrangement. Until now, we still don't know what happened to that 49% shareholding that FINSAC had in the merchant bank, which merged with DB&G. We don't know what happened. Is it that DB&G bought them out eventually? Or is it that they surrendered their shares? Big difference. If they were bought out, then they would have recovered some money and it had to be reported somewhere. If, on the other hand, they had surrendered the shares, it means that that $148 million would have been a gift to Daring, Bunting and Golding. But we don't know what happened to that 49%. What we do know is that after this very favorable deal, which was given to Daring, Bunting and Golding by FINSAC, their profits began to soar. The Gleaner reported November 11, 1998, just a few months after, DB&G profits rising. Listen to this. Remember now, June, July, August, September, October, 5 months after. It seemed as if they had a company before, but the agreement was signed in June. 5 months after that agreement was signed, this is what was reported in the Gleaner. Investment bank Daring, Bunting and Golding has continued its strong performance as net profit in the third quarter doubled to almost $10 million when compared to the same period a year earlier. You remember that? Yes. The investment bank, which has seen after-tax profit jump from $15.2 million to $20.3 million in the first 9 months of this year, appears to be firing on all cylinders. Gross operating revenue in the first 3 quarters of the year more than doubled from $478.2 million to just over $1 billion. The bank has also seen its assets swell as clients move to use its services. Total assets, which include funds under management for clients, rose from $2 billion in the 9 months ended September 30, 1997 to $3.3 billion at the end of September this year. And this is what I need you to hear. The sharp improvement in profitability came as gross operating revenue for the year rose by a fifth, which is 20%, to $710 million. The company said at the time that while increasing its overall loan portfolio, much of the emphasis was in the areas of money market operation and primary dealer business, increasing its activity in the profitable Bank of Jamaica reverse repo market and foreign exchange trading. See? And then it goes on to say other things about its restructuring and all of that. So, the Cambio, which they acquired when they bought the two Billy Craig FinSac companies, the buying and selling of foreign exchange, that as well as the repo market, this is government trading in government papers, that was what really launched them. And later on, they were able to buy Eagle Unit Trust and so on. Profits rose to 180 million in 2002. They also became brokers and were trading on the stock exchange as well. So this deal that FinSac, this setup that FinSac gave to them, right, was what really launched them and made them able to make super profits. So by the time Scotiabank came, the shares that they had sold for 10 cents, Scotiabank was offering them $21.08 and them jump at it. Why? Well, by the time 2006 rolled in, things weren't looking so well on the political scene for the PNP. And so, if the JLP were to come to power, a lot of those little favors they were getting, it's unlikely that they will continue to get it. And that would definitely dip into business and trading on the stock exchange. If your business start to dip and profits start to fall, so will those shares, which means the amount of money that they will be able to get for those shares would decrease and decrease and decrease, and therefore they'll be losing money. So when Scotiabank came with this generous offer, they grabbed it and made pots of money. That's how they really make the money now, right? Bunting was able to make the equivalent of 13 million US dollars, and Mark made 8.7 million US equivalent. Dr. Omar Davies, who was the finance minister at the time when all these good fortunes were coming your way, he then make a way for you again. What did you say he did for you?
I came into the party through Dr. Omar Davies because I knew him in the financial sector, where I had been like one of the leading corporate lawyers in Jamaica and very involved in financial engineering. And so when he was Minister of Finance, a lot of the things that required industry input, I was one of the representatives of the industry that he would deal with. I got to know him through that.
So that's how you got to know Dr. Omar Davies, through your dealings with him when you were involved in financial engineering. You never know him none of the time when FinSac was giving you all these little deals that they were not given to other people. No, of course not. You were only the lawyer. It would have been Bunting. And then what is more, isn't it a curious thing, Mark, that when the leadership race came about in 2006 and Omar Davies had entered the fray, who was it that you and Bunting was supporting in that race? Was it Portia? Was it Dr. Peter Phillips? Was it Carl Bly? No, I don't think so. You were supporting Omar Davies. Now, isn't that curious? And there you are, sitting in his seat in South St. Andrew. What the hell is the nature of the relationship between you, Bunting, and Dr. Omar Davies? And spare us a thought. The dealings between DB&G and FinSac. What would you call it had it been Andrew Holness was in your position? You would have called that corruption, nepotism, cronyism, and you would also say there was a clear conflict of interest. When it came to your dealings, DB&G with the Ministry of Finance, if a Labour Party former MP was to find himself in that position, such as Othniel Lawrence for argument's sake, what would you say about it on the political platform? What would you refer to that arrangement as? Would you say that that was a conflict of interest, corruption, siphoning off public money to friends? and the few connected people, bearing in mind that at the time Peter Bunting ran on a PNP ticket as a member of parliament. And the question of whether he was still a member of the PNP is neither here nor there. The connection was there. So what you call this joint venture between DB&G and FINSAC, don't you agree with me that that is cronyism and corruption at its best? And then your support for Omar Davies in his bid to take over the PNP and become Prime Minister of Jamaica, that would have been payback for all the goodness that he had done for you and the fortune that he has made you over the years. Isn't that what you would have called it if Andrew Holness had done that? Mr. Clean Hands and a Clean Heart? And so I ask the question again. What the hell is the nature of the relationship between you, Bunting, and Dr. Omar Davies? I ask because I don't know. What is the answer to that question? Folks, that's where I'm going to leave it today. Thank you all so much for joining me, for sharing, for subscribing, for leaving your comments in the comment section, and for giving the video a thumbs up. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and walk good.